So it's a very great pleasure, and seems a long time to be in Cambridge without having met Richard Keynes. So thank you very much indeed for agreeing to be interviewed today. Richard, when were you born?
August the 14th, 1919.
And where was that?
In London.
Okay, well, usually I ask people about their parents, but in your case, can we start at your great-grandparents?
Yes.
Who were your great-grandparents?
My great-grandparents, the most best-known one was Charles Darwin. And that picture up on the wall is the family copy of him taken in his old age by my uncle Leonard Darwin, my great-uncle Leonard Darwin.
So Darwin obviously has had a huge influence on your life.
Well, yes, but the story about that is that actually in 1968 I had still never really taken a particular interest in Darwin, which always rather hurt my mother, who was a great Darwinist, but I simply hadn't taken great interest in him. And I was then travelling from South America from working with a friend in Chile, back through Buenos Aires, and people in Buenos Aires said, "Have you seen the Darwin collection in Buenos Aires?" And I said no. But then it turned out that the Argentinian professor who was showing me around knew of this collection, so he took me to see him. And these belonged to a man called Brown Menendez, who was, I think, a descendant of one of the wicked Germans who used to own most of Patagonia, but was a perfectly charming lawyer, actually. And he in his possession had two sketchbooks painted by Conrad Martins, who was the second official painter on the voyage of the Beagle. And these suddenly brought me. These now are all in the university library because I arranged for Nora Barlow she had a convenient fund, and I thought he asked me to sell them, and I didn't understand why he wanted to sell them. Because it didn't seem to be because he wasn't rich enough or anything, and so we left it at that. And then I thought, well, it would be much better, knowing that Nora had this fund, which she used to use for giving things to Down House and Darwin connected things, and I thought that she'd pay for it. So I got Christie's to value these things, which they were then worth gigantically less than they are today. So they were bought then, and they're now, those particular pictures are now in the university library.
After having discovered this Darwin collection in Buenos Aires, then when you came back, did you start investigating?
When I came back, I started investigating, and I eventually published a book called the Beetle Record.
Yes.
Which has a lot of the pictures which were in that book reproduced in it, and that was the first big book that I produced. I did write. Well, it was actually mostly quotations from family letters to Darwin during the voyage of the Beagle.
And were these family letters already in the university library, or?
Yes, they were all. I didn't have to do any research to get them. They were all there.
But it's interesting that he didn't really have an influence on your academic career at all, except for getting interested later. I mean, it didn't turn you into becoming an academic that you had.
The person who did that was A.V. Hill, who was
Polly Hill's father.
Polly Hill's father, and I knew him extremely well, and he was certainly. It was certainly him who resulted in my being a physiologist.
Was it? He was a Nobel Prize winner, wasn't he?
He was a Nobel Prize winner too, yes.
And a physiologist.
Yes.
And how was he related to you?
Well, he was my uncle.
Your uncle.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And I knew him extremely well.
Mm. So that's...
And went on knowing him till he died, when he was fairly old anyway.
Mm. What sort of person was he? Autocratic?
Well, Polly would have said so, yes.
That's why I said it.
I don't think his male relatives would have ever found him that.
Mm. There's a nice portrait of him in King's College, which I look at. Well, we've moved down to the next generation now. So we've got the Hills on one side, and the Keyneses. How did the Keyneses come in?
Well, my father was a Keynes.
Yes.
And the portrait in the room next door is him, because he was the first, I think, the first university registrar.
Was he?
And he was a fellow of Pembroke. Then he got thrown out of. He was a sort of economist, or
yes,
that sort of thing. And he got thrown out of his college fellowship when he did such wicked things, going to being a
registry. Yes, really? They didn't think.
I think Pembroke made him an honorary fellow later on, but I know there was a sort of faint feeling against the college sometimes during my childhood for that reason.
I mean, registry is an administrative officer.
Yes.
Was he also an academic or book collector?
Well, yes, he was a perfectly sound academic.
In what field?
It was well, it wasn't economics, but it was I don't know what you would call
statistics
it.
or
yes, that sort of thing.
I see.
And he was a dear old man, but I remember him quite well, except he didn't talk very much when he was a very old man. He died in his 90s. So.
This is your father?
My father's father.
Oh, grandfather, yes, of course. Still 2 generations back. And do you remember your grandmother on that side?
Extremely well, yes, because she was the second woman mayor of Cambridge.
Really?
And
what was her name?
Frances Ada Keynes.
And she was a lively...
She was a very, very good administrator, obviously. She was an absolutely splendid person.
So you spent...
She ran everyone, but in the most unbossy sort of way. So.
Sounds lovely. So you spent a lot of time with your grandparents, did you, or not?
Well, I visited them very frequently, yes.
Because they were living in Cambridge.
And my other grandmother, my American grandmother, lived in Cambridge too, and she didn't die until after the Second World War. I used to go and stay with her quite a lot during the war.
And how were you related to Gwen Raverett then?
Well, she was my aunt, my mother's sister.
I see. So Period Piece, which we discussed off camera, was about your childhood as well?
No, it wasn't, because the reason that Period Piece got written was that when my American grandmother came over and got married, she then, after that, wrote a lot of letters to her family at home in Philadelphia, which contained all sorts of details about social existence in Cambridge, which no English wife like this would have thought of any interest to people. But she wrote an absolutely splendid collection of letters. Now, I don't know what's happened to those, because my mother and Gwen thought maybe they ought to be published.
Yes, indeed.
They were so good. But then it turned out that there were probably so many people still alive who'd been children when the book was written, when
Period Piece was written.
Period Piece was coming into life, and it might be embarrassing.
Yes.
And then Gwen said, "Oh well, I'll write a book about it all." So she sat down and wrote Period Piece with a lot more of her own drawings and things to illustrate it.
What was she?
It's still in print.
Yes, and it's still a bestseller. It's a lovely book. What was she like as a person? Do you remember her?
I liked her very much. Yes. She was quite fierce sometimes, I think.
Well, she was frightened by those tigers under the bed, I seem to remember, when she was a child. She had to be fierce. So we're moving now down to that generation, your parents' generation. Tell me something about your mother and father.
Well, my mother was a very good mother, very good indeed. But she wasn't, and she did hospital things. My father was the senior surgeon at Bart's until 1960, I think. After that, he turned into writing books by the dozen on bibliography.
Yes. What was his Christian name? Remind
Geoffrey.
me. Geoffrey. Oh yes, a famous bibliographer.
But he died at 93, I think, still writing another book.
Yes.
I don't think I'm going to equal him, at least I hope I'm not.
What, in age or in books?
No, well, certainly not in books, but I have written quite a lot of books since.
Yes. And your mother was also, I mean, a good mother and a...
She was a very good mother.
But not. She didn't have an academic career really. She was mainly in the home.
No, she was at she was in Oxford. She was at Somerville in Oxford. But I don't remember that.
And then it was your father's brother who was John Maynard. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes. And how do you remember him? In what way do you remember him?
Well, I remember him very kindly because he was always, I mean, he had a reputation for being rather fierce sometimes, but he was always very kind to young nephews. Very kind indeed.
I mean, do you remember any particular incidents in your relationship? Any book he suggested or any...
He made one mistake because he made me, as a present to the family, he made me a fellow of the zoo. And so I used to go to, I was famous because I used to put my threes backwards when we went to the zoo in London. And then at the beginning of the war, he gave up since we obviously weren't be able to do it. But what it never occurred to him to do was to make me a life fellow, because if he had done, I could have gone on with no further payments for the rest of my life. I didn't, and I thought that was the kind of thing he ought to have worked out for himself.
As an economist, it would have been much cheaper.
But he was very nice indeed. And
did you ever see him working? Because one of the things that struck me about the portraits of him in King's College is that the way he managed to produce so many books on so many different subjects may have been related to the fact that he had this, he always used to, in the portraits, be sitting with a sort of green wooden shelf or tray on his knee, in casual, on a sofa or on a chair with a little hat on, scribbling away. And
yes.
I had the sense that he, as many busy men are, he was very good at organising his time and could work under any circumstances.
I think that's probably true. It must be true, yes. Because he certainly worked continuously and he was always writing his books. But the great character there that I loved so much was my aunt Lydia, who was the Russian
Lydia Lopakova.
Lydia Lopakova.
Yes.
And I became her, along with what's his name, your friend Lord, the economist in Keynes.
Oh, Khan.
Lord Khan. That's
yes.
Right.
Yes.
He and I were her two executors.
Ah, right.
And trustees for, and she after all lived on another 20-something years after Maynard died. So I was in charge of her family, her personal things, and her money was looked after by Richard Kahn.
And that's why you edited her letters to John Maynard.
Well, yes, but then we inherited, I suppose, her descendants were included us and me and Polly and so on, and we thought that we ought to publish her letters. So Polly and I actually edited those letters, and then they're all the originals are all back in Keynes now. And so we used to know Lydia extremely well. She was a wonderful character.
Was she? You can see why Keynes married her, can you?
Yeah, you can indeed.
What was special about her? She was just very warm
She had a
and
lovely sense of humour
mm,
and very warm.
mm.
Yes.
Had Keynes been very interested in the arts? I mean, he helped set up the arts theatre and so on before he married her, or was her?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Mm. But she also encouraged that interest. I mean,
Well, sort of.
mm.
Yes. No, she was a most adorable person. We used to go, and she went on living in the house that he had in Tilton in Sussex,
Mm.
and we used to go. We used to go and take her to Glyndebourne
Yes.
every summer, and go and stay with her for a little while.
Mm.
And she was a very great character.
When I first came to Cambridge, I was in the flat that Keynes shared, I thought, with her in just above David's bookshop.
Oh, that's right. That's where she was. She went on using that.
Mm.
I mean, it belonged to Keynes.
Yes, that's right.
She went on using that.
St
for a
David's
while after
Passage.
he died.
Yes, yes.
And then when she went and lived permanently at Tilton,
Mm.
and we used to go and have summer holidays at Tilton, always painted with lenders.
Mm. Wonderful. What a well, one could have a whole session about your relatives, but we ought to get down to you now.
Okay.
So you were born in London, 1919.
Yep.
Do you remember anything about your first schools?
Well, my first school was the Hall School, Hampstead.
Mm.
Little boys with a little red cross on their
Yes.
on their caps.
Mm.
And that was a very good school, I thought. It was done by Fitzroy, by what's it called, the big crossing at the bottom of the hill.
Yes.
And that was a very good school, I think.
Mm. I mean, this was just when you were 7 or 8 or something like that. Was it your preparatory school or your?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was a preparatory school, so I must have started it at 7 or 8, I
Yeah.
suppose, and then went on until I went to Oundle
Mm.
when I was 13, probably.
Yes. There was probably no one at your first school who you particularly remember influencing you or setting you in any direction or
No, I
any
don't
friends?
think so.
No.
I don't think there.
I do remember, I mean, I went to the Dragon School in Oxford,
Oh, yes.
and there are several teachers now who I still think probably had some influence on me. A communist who was improbable member of the staff, but a great Gilbert and Sullivan fan. So I became. But
Yes, my Keynes grandfather was a great Gilbert and Sullivan fan.
really,
Yes.
so
He
you.
had a big collection of records.
Mm. Well, going on to Oundle then.
Yes.
How did you find
Well, I was very happy there,
all the time?
and yes, I think so.
Mm.
I was rather glad that I'd been there in what not sure that they still do, which is that everyone in the school spends 1 week every term working in the workshops.
Gosh, what kind of
So
workshops? I mean, sort of wooden.
wood workshops,
Mm.
metal workshops.
I'm sure they don't do
I
that.
remember trying to shoe a horse when I was there. And when you got to be if you were a scientist, the week that you might have done in the workshops, you instead just did doing experiments in the school.
Mm.
And it was very successful. That was a very successful. That thing, it must have been introduced by that famous headmaster from Oundle.
Mm. So,
And I had a very good housemaster at Oundle.
do you remember his name?
Ian Hebburn.
Hebburn.
He was a chemistry master, but he was a very, very good housemaster.
Were you head of house or?
No, I had one of my very closest friends was always the head of the house, and was much better head than I'm sure I would have been. And he ended up by getting 3 MCs in the war.
Gosh.
He was if you could think of anyone you would like to have had your leader in the infantry, it would have been Ian English.
That sounds a familiar name. Did he go on to do anything after the war?
Well, not particularly, no. I mean, he became a businessman, I think, but he went on. He went on being very faithful to his life. He lived in Newcastle, so that he belonged to the appropriate people then.
So, this housemaster influenced you. Were there any other teachers who particularly influenced you? Any science or?
One other one I remember was now I'm going to forget his name on you.
Oh, don't worry. But what did he do?
He taught French, and he was very, very. He was Victor Rothschild's secretary for a long time after that, and he always used to run the school plays. And I was in 2 of the school plays, I remember. And then there was one day when the masters' wives, who were taking the female parts, were all not there. So our master said, "Oh, I'll do that." He got us all in total hysterics in no time at all. So. No, he was a good person.
But he didn't encourage you to do French.
No, I'd been having holidays in France and so on. No, the important thing that I was able to do in France, which I wish we'd been able to do for my own trip, was to go to. We went to the Abbaye de Pontigny, which was in Burgundy.
Yes.
And they had there was a famous place where the socialists used to go and meet. And they had a sort of international summer school during the summer, and I spent 3 months there in Burgundy, Pontigny.
Lovely.
Most lovely place. You would hardly get to sleep at night because of the nightingales. And everyone was very nice then at this place. And I didn't. We all had to speak French because there was one other Englishman whom I still meet actually. But otherwise, they were all different nationalities, so we had to speak French as being the only.
How old were you at this time? You were still at school.
I was 18.
Ah, yes.
Or 17.
Were you beginning to feel that science was what you wanted to do at this point, or? I mean, what?
No, I was doing. I've got A.V. Hill.
Yes.
Had me firmly on those lines a long time earlier.
Oh, I see.
He used to have all his sons were all scientists. You see.
So there was no question that you wouldn't that you would do. I mean, was he specific that you were going to be a physiologist, or was he?
Well, he was a physiologist. You see. Yes, I think it was.
And you did reasonably well and got all your exams. And did you have any other hobbies particularly? I mean, you were in the school plays. What were the plays, by the way? Were they Shakespeare or something?
No, they were well known. They were well known plays.
Sort of.
I can't remember that.
Yes. Did you have any particular hobbies at that point apart from learning French and listening to nightingales?
No, I eventually became an ornithologist. But that was more because I was sent on the Public Schools Exploring Society to a trip to northern, right up to the north of not Sweden,
Norway.
Norway.
Yes.
And then I for some reason I said I was interested when I was being interviewed by the admiral, he was called, who ran the place. And I said I was an ornithologist. I didn't know very much ornithology then actually. But,
yes.
But then when I was at Arundel, the headmaster Fisher, Bud Fisher, was always used to have a boy to caddy for him by carrying a telescope, and he took him out bird watching.
Yes.
And I became a great pal of Bud Fisher's actually. And he was supposed to teach German, I think. And I must say I didn't think he was a very good teacher of German. He was quite a successful headmaster though.
What was his first name? Blunt.
Kenneth.
Oh, Kenneth. Yeah.
Kenneth Fisher.
But you called him something like Blunt. Or,
yes.
Blunt Fisher. That was his nickname. So, did you, when you had finished at Oundle, did you try for several universities, or was it
No,
just Cambridge?
just Cambridge.
Hmm.
Well, there's all my relations live
Yes.
in Cambridge. So
Yes. And did you try several colleges, or just you went to Trinity?
that's Trinity, I think.
Yes. And you got straight
And then
in.
AV pushed me to do physiology and so on. Then,
Hmm.
and I think he subsequently examined me for my PhD.
Really?
After that.
That's very incestuous.
Very incestuous.
But as an undergraduate, you did physiology, you did natural science
I
tripos.
did natural science tripos. Yes.
And you got a first, did you? Or was it in two parts? Well, anyway.
Well, no, I didn't, because well, I did later on, because you see, then the walk, then
the war came.
when I went to Oundle, I was in the junior house, and so after the end of my first year, I was allowed to take the entrance, the examination to Oundle, and astonished everybody by coming top in everything. But I did have the advantage of the others, I think, having been taught it. Oundle myself already then. But then when the war started, which was in my second year,
as an undergraduate,
I went to do physics first of all. But after that, after 2 terms, I decided that if I stayed on and took the tripos, having only done half the part 1 of the tripos in physics, I might have failed altogether, which wouldn't have done me any good at all. And I knew that AV knew that he was right in the thick of it and organising the whole of the science around the place, and so I then switched to I then got a first in. No, then I just went to work for the Admiralty.
That's right. Yes, you worked on submarines, or related to submarines.
I first of all worked on submarines. Yes, that's a long story which I won't go into. But
can you abbreviate it, or I mean, is there any particular?
Well, I put it all in the book that I
okay.
written. No, because it was the most useful thing I did during war that I was working at Fairley, which was then we'd been moved up from Weymouth,
yes,
Dockyard, up to the Clyde,
yes,
because we needed to have submarines in the neighbourhood so that we could do experiments on them, and so that we were in Scotland, and then in 1942, which was the year when the number of submarines, number of ships torpedoed, got to a top. Got very bad. I found that everybody at Fairley was absolutely fed up with the director, and it was his attitude which really prevented us from doing any work. But you see, the senior members of the staff, who were perfectly willing to talk to me, was one of the most junior members of the staff. They also felt strongly that they ought to be doing something rather different, and they were prepared to talk to me because they weren't in a position where they could go to the director of science research in the Admiralty and complain, because they were all, I mean, they were already on the staff.
Yes.
But there wasn't anything that I and one of my friends, Roger West, could. I mean, we could be thrown out, but there wasn't anything. We couldn't be punished with anything.
Yes.
And we'd all signed all the secret papers, so
and
everything. So I had decided that we could really do something about it. And so I wrote a long memorandum about what was wrong with the institute, and after a fierce argument with the director, he agreed to send it to the Admiralty.
Yes.
Because it had that other people had complained rather before, but the Admiralty in London had managed to squash it all time, which is quite wrong. And so I then, then I did a beautiful controlled leak and sent a copy of my long report to my cousin Maurice Hill, who was on at home, I knew, and he immediately gave it to AV,
Yes.
and AV immediately went round to the Athenaeum
Mm.
and had lunch with the Third Sea Lord, and told him that there was something going wrong in Fairley, which he'd better put right, which he did.
So they got rid of the director.
So they sent him to be
Retrained.
they sent him to be a British representative in Washington, where he didn't do any harm.
Mm. And things looked up after that.
Well, yes, and then they elected. I can't remember the name of the man. He was a physicist in Cambridge who was made rector instead of him, and whom I never met him. I mean, I went to his lectures, but I never met him. But he did very well, apparently, which didn't surprise me at all.
So you may have saved our...
So, well, I was used for... AV helped me very, very much in all that. And I first of all met Patrick Blackett.
Oh, yes.
Who was then Director of Operational Research in the Admiralty.
Mm.
And I made much more impression on Blackett than I realised at the time, because some good many years after that, I was on the Council of the Royal Society when Blackett was president. Blackett wasn't the same person by all accounts. He'd been wonderfully lively and active man when he was much younger, but he was rather old by then. Don't know how he seemed to have been much more impressed by me when he met me at 9:42 than I realised. He started pushing me almost embarrassingly.
That's interesting.
But I was quite a good time going around the place with other people from the Royal Society then.
So you did your 3 or 4 years, was it, in war service? I was 3.
Well, it was 1941
to
1940, early 1940 to
45.
45, when I managed to get out. I got special quick release from the chief scientist in the and went and read Physiology Part 2. And I got a lot of fear first and things there. But those people who came back to the university at that period were much better than they were subsequently. They were all tended to be much older, you see.
Yes, matured.
They were they were better students to teach.
So this is about 1947. You get your Part 2.
1946, I got my degree. Yes, and then 2 years later, I was made a fellow of Trinity, research fellow.
What were you researching on?
I was researching on nerves, but I was the man. My chief teacher was Alan Macfarlane.
Ah, right.
Who was the really, for my money, was a very
distinguished,
very great man, very well-deserved scientist and Nobel Prize winner and so on. And I worked with him longer than anyone else did, actually. I worked for him for about 5 years.
Really? Gosh.
We used to go to Plymouth and work together all the time. He was an absolutely splendid person.
I remember in my interview with Sidney Brenner, he said that the only way a scientist really can learn, there's no other way than by apprenticeship. Working with a really good scientist in a lab.
Well, I think that's quite true. I mean, I was doing that, but when I started doing research, Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley,
yes,
who also shared the Nobel Prize with him, were all busy doing modern electronics. I'd been designing radar sets and things for a good many years, so I knew a bit of electronics, and so I had, but that's much easier time to start then, because there were so many absolutely vital problems sitting on the desk in the way in which they're just not there to this. I mean, there are plenty of big institutes with hundreds of people doing research, but they were nearly all doing similar sorts of problems, and it was much easier for us in 1946 than it would be, or 1948, whatever.
And it would be today.
Much more.
I mean, the thesis you were doing, was it chosen for you by
No, it was chosen for me by myself, I think.
Was it?
I can't tell it, but I dare say Alan, because what I did was to start working on radioisotopes. and it was the time when they hadn't ever been done. No one had used them in England before. So I had to start by discovering how to make radiosodium and radiopotassium, which fortunately there was an ancient what they call those machines for making radiating things, which had been laid up during the war, and the Cavendish recovered it, and so I was able to make my own isotopes and do quite a lot of things, pioneer things that way.
Where were you working? Were you in the old Cavendish?
No, I was working in the physiology department.
Ah, yes. That's over in the Downing site.
Yes.
That's right. Because I work in the old Cavendish laboratory, and in the room where they discovered pulsars, radio astronomy. So, but I know the physiology.
Yes, well, that was all. Well, that's where Francis Crick and everyone were all.
That's
working.
right. I had
And
talked to Sydney about that.
Yes, I bet you did. Sydney had lovely rude names for all the most eminent people.
He didn't tell me those.
I won't repeat.
I'll have to have another session with him for the rude names. So you were working on that, and then at the end of your research fellowship, what did you do?
Well, it would have been nice to have stayed on as a teaching fellow, but unfortunately, Trinity then had Hodgkin and Huxley and William Rushton,
Gosh.
who were all very eminent physiologists, and they didn't need another one. And I was then elected a fellow at Peterhouse.
Ah, right.
And Peterhouse was a very nice college there, because it was so much smaller.
Yes. And so, how long were you there?
Well, I was there for about 5 years, until I did something. No, wait a moment. I was there from 1952 to 1960, I suppose. But then I did something very unacceptable to the then master of Peterhouse.
Who was that? Was that the archaeologist? No, he wasn't.
No. He was a very good friend of mine, but it was his predecessor, whom I didn't have a great deal of respect for, because he'd written a very important textbook on science, history of science, but never seemed to me in the least interested in the history of science.
Oh, right. Well, I think I know who you mean. Yes, the historian. He was a historian.
That's right.
Yeah.
But and then he didn't approve. Then I took a job as being deputy director and very soon afterwards director of Abraham Institute of Animal Physiology, and I spent quite a few years there.
Yes.
Well, until I came back as professor of physiology.
Why didn't he approve that? He thought it would take you away from your duties in
Well, it had no
Peterhouse.
connection with the university at that time.
I see.
They now have, but since then, because I insisted on having allowed graduate students there and so on, they're now still in existence, but they're run by the ARC, Agricultural Research Institute. But they do have quite some eminent people there, and it's quite a good place.
So, I mean, as you know, I know nothing about science, and some of my questions may be naive, but is there a distinction between animal physiology and human physiology? I mean, you are now running an animal physiology unit. Was that a deviation from previous work, or just a continuation?
Well, I mean, they both got a lot of the same things in hand. And I didn't ever do any human physiology. But
you didn't? No. I see. So you sort of lost your Peterhouse fellowship, and quite soon became almost a founding fellow of Churchill.
Yes.
Were you a founding fellow?
I was counted as a founding fellow, but I was actually appointed 1 month or so after the other real founding fellows, I think. No, that was quite a happy time, but I didn't really. I don't know. It seemed to me actually that too many of them. We had some very good people in Abraham.
Yes.
But most of the staff there was simply doing the same research, the same piece of research as they'd got for getting their doctorates in the first place. And they weren't really frightfully exciting.
Do you feel as I think I do, that it's very important to keep moving onto new areas and topics. Certainly in the arts it is, because after about 5 or 8 years the laws of diminishing returns set in and you become stale, and you need a big...
No, I think that is quite true. Yes, I agree with that.
And has your work been a sort of discovering new problems and moving on to them?
Well, I'm not sure that it has so much, because I started working on squid giant nerve fibres with Alan Hodgkin, and went on doing that until I went to Abraham. And then when I got to Abraham, well, I couldn't really stop working on squid axons, so I used to go, and then you said that was work that could only be done for a short time in the autumn when the squid were available. And so I used to actually absent myself from being director of Abraham and disappear to Plymouth.
Is that where the squids were?
I claimed I was the only member of one of these big institutes who'd been sent for to London by the director and lectured too much for doing too much research myself. I didn't have a great deal of respect for that particular director.
How did you enjoy Churchill? Because recently I did an interview with another founding fellow, George Steiner.
Oh, well, yes.
You must know George.
I know George very well.
And he's also a good talker, as you
yes.
know. And he obviously enjoyed the association with Churchill very much. And you've given all your papers to Churchill, haven't you? Your personal.
Well, yeah. Well, I dumped a lot of stuff on them when I finally retired in '86.
Yes.
I had a vast number of papers and nowhere to put them, and no lab.
Yes.
So I gave them all to the Churchill archives.
Yes.
And they can have the rest of mine when later on from. Well, maybe I would start getting rid of some of them now, so I can have room for more books.
Well, you've already deposited 104 archive cases of papers.
Yeah.
How many more do you think you've got?
Well, I thought the same number at least.
Gosh. Well, you're lucky to have an archives that will take all that.
Well, it's a very good archive set. And I was president of the archive committee at Churchill for a totally indecent length of time. So I happened to be there with. There was no rule that said that I wasn't allowed to be re-elected.
Yes.
And I kept on being re-elected. And when I finally decided, look, they'd had enough of me. And we investigated when I'd started signing the minute books. Turned out I'd been signing them for 24 years or something.
Well, they could
I enjoyed that very much. But by then I was writing books primarily, you see.
Well, we'll come to those books in a minute.
Yeah.
But coming back to Cambridge, we're now in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And when do you become a professor?
After I left Abraham.
After you left Abraham. You become Professor of Physiology.
Yeah. And
Director of the department, or?
Yes. But that's all been switched now, because the whole thing's been... physiology has been fused with anatomy.
That's right, yes.
And I'm not sure I quite approve everything that's been done on behalf of the physiologists, but
what was your time as professor and director a fruitful and happy time?
Yes.
I mean,
but actually at that time, quite soon after then, I was spending a long time. I can't remember when. We had a big meeting in Cambridge to see whether there should be an international society for biophysics founded. And everyone was in favour of that, except Hodgkin and Huxley, who didn't seem to approve for some reason. I never quite understood why not. But in any case, I knew an institute was set up, and well, it is still running. And I became secretary of it for a long time, and was doing things for them. And then I became president of it ultimately. And that resulted in my going and becoming a member of the of ICSU, International Council of Scientific Unions, which is the international body for science. And then I worked for, the thing that I particularly enjoyed is that I became chairman of a committee called, wait a moment, what is the name of it? ICSU and UNESCO. It's an international organization of...
Don't worry, scientific something or other.
I don't remember, that's the form of word.
Yes.
Which I've forgotten. But this had the result, what we considered this committee should do was to support third world people, to teach themselves, and not just pour money at them, but to get it for themselves to work. And so, as I was chairman of the committee, we had to go and meet somewhere every year, and I went on for about 10 years doing this.
So which countries did you go to?
Well,
all over the world.
All over the world. Well, what really happened originally was that when I was in 1951, a man called Carlos Chagas, who was a Brazilian and son of the inventor of Chagas's disease.
Ah, yes.
And he came to Cambridge to find someone to be the visiting reader that year, and wanted to get Alan Hodgkin. And Alan was never a very good man for travelling, I don't think. And Andrew was busy getting married, I think. So they both turned it down. But I could see no reason why I shouldn't accept the invitation. So I did accept it, and then I went and worked for 3 months in Rio, where I worked on what I knew about the latest technique which you needed for discovering how electric eels actually produce their electricity. And I did that very successfully with a collaboration with a man called Martin Ferreira in Rio, and greatly enjoyed that. And then I went on, and then I became partly instrumental in trying to get third world biologists properly educated. The only difficulty was we never had enough money. We were promised millions of dollars by ICSU sometimes, but by UNESCO sometimes, but we never actually got it. and the university, the people I'd met could really have made good use of that money. But the Royal Society, I rather disagreed with, because the first person, every year we had a meeting of the Royal Society about ICSU affairs, and I'd already spent some time as a member of the executive committee of ICSU, working out how much we might increase our the money we asked for from the countries in order to keep us going. We weren't asking for more every year, and we always started by being heavily ticked off by the Royal Society for wanting any more money. And I must say I didn't approve of the Royal Society for those things.
Being so mean, yes. Is this why you? I noticed in your in the curriculum vitae that you have various honours and awards from Brazil.
Yes, that is. I've got honorary degrees and all sorts of things from Brazil. But I did. Those were actually ones that I really did work for.
So
it isn't true of all people who get them.
You've had a long-term association with Brazil, then.
Yes.
Yes. And you admire Brazilian scientists and found many friends.
The ones I worked with were good. Yes. Yeah, I mean, in all those countries, they're sometimes they're very good, sometimes they're not very good. But Brazil was a leading one. Though actually, Chile was the best country. It was the most time I was doing that work.
I was wondering, I mean, you've done quite a lot of administrative jobs, heads of and deputy directors and chairing archives committees and other things. How do you balance between research, teaching, and administration? Did you find they conflicted, or they feed into each other? Did you enjoy administration? Some people find it tedious.
Well, I enjoyed running these societies, but I didn't particularly enjoy being director of the institute. I had to determine who was going to be promoted and so on, and I really didn't. I didn't colossally admire the ARC actually.
That's the Agricultural Research Council.
Research Council.
They were funding.
They were funding it. Then in later, then I for a long time I was on the executive committee of the Plymouth laboratory, because I went on working on even when I was working at Babraham, I went quite often in the autumn for a month or so to work on squid there, and the ARC didn't prove that. but I had various American colleagues mostly who came and worked with me, and that was fun. But I didn't. I after that, I mean, between 1960 and 1986, when I retired, I was doing much more. I was always going back to squid for a while, and I was writing lots of books and things. But I wasn't really doing much research. I didn't have a lab in Cambridge.
Were you doing?
And I wish I'd had more. And I think we slipped a bit. I don't think I was really responsible, because I could never get any money from the only thing that matters to these departments nowadays is how much money they've got.
Yes, exactly.
And they have to ask for money. And the Medical Research Council always flatly refused to give me any money for Babraham. And I thought they were wrong, but there wasn't anything I could do about it. I tried hard.
Did you teach much? I mean, did you lecture?
I lectured as professor, yes.
Did you enjoy lecturing, or?
Yes. It was quite useful when I was ill and went to do Addenbrooke's later on, which I had to do a fair number of times. And there are quite a lot of the people who came to
your lectures were there.
Had been to my lectures, and that never did any harm.
Exactly. What about supervising? Did you supervise PhD students at all, or?
Well, yes, but one of my most famous PhD students was Jared Darwin.
Really?
Who wrote that book on
yes, I know. Third chimpanzee and things.
He was the cleverest graduate student I ever had.
Really?
I think he's. I got his last book.
Yes.
Somewhere, which Anne's given me. And I don't think he's gone on
the Great Collapse.
The university wanted to appoint him as professor of zoology at one point.
They did.
But he did want to come to Cambridge because of the education of his sons, I think.
But he turned it down, didn't he?
No, but he couldn't possibly. What you get paid in Cambridge was totally different from what you get paid in UCLA.
Yes. But he was a very clever man.
Certainly very clever,
nice man? You like him?
Yes, he was rather. He didn't always do things the way I thought they ought to be done earlier on, but he certainly got much more human after he got married. And he's very bright.
Yes, I like his work.
The thing that's been occupying me most for recent years was writing more books about Darwin, or at least, I mean, the most important one by far that I've done was actually turned out that his zoology notes made on the beagle had never been published.
Good heavens!
They'd just been sitting in the university library, but hadn't been published. So I produced this whole volume.
Yes.
Which is there. And I spent 4 years hard work actually, and I really felt that I was talking to the old man sometimes because it was all in his hand. Everyone always thought the most difficult thing was the handwriting, which wasn't actually. After all, they could all read each other's handwriting at that time.
Do you spend much time at Down House? Do you go there often?
Well, no, I have not recently. Well, I can't walk at all far. I've got a badly arthritic back, and So I'm not.
I've got some of the stones. You know, he has a thinking path.
Yes.
I have a thinking path in my garden with some of the stones. So he's reputed to have picked up a stone each time he walked round.
Yeah.
He made a little pile.
Counting. Yes. Yes.
Counting. What I mean, when you say you got to know him, or you sort of felt you were talking to him, did you form any impression of his character? I mean, he was.
He was the most charming and friendly person.
Was he?
He must have got on with everybody.
Mm. So he was quite sort of hypochondriac at some point, or
well, certainly, yes. I mean, his illness certainly was partly.
There was exaggerated.
Yeah, exaggerated, but and actually, there are two doctors in Chile who just produced a new diagnosis for him, which is something called Fall's disease. I can't remember, not remembering it right. It is a disease of your innards.
So he probably did have something.
But I
you admire him?
No, I tell you, I admired him immensely. Yes, the Cambridge University Press originally published it at £95.
Wow!
So it didn't sell very well.
No.
But they then, by great good fortune, they then digitalized it.
Yes.
And I think you could now buy it for £30.
Oh, well.
And the books are absolutely the same size as the original. And they ought to be able to sell a lot of copies in Darwin year next year, whenever it is.
Do you use the Darwin? They've put online a lot of Darwin's correspondence, haven't they, in the university library?
I've given them a lot of stuff to add to that.
Have you? And they haven't added it yet. So
no, they have added.
And they have added it. Yeah.
But for a long time, the notes that he made hadn't been properly printed. My aunt Nora Barlow, who was a very, very good ornithologist herself, so a long time she edited his bird notes, which have been published some time ago, and that kept us all going. When she wrote the Beagle, I re-edited the Beagle Diary because 50 years after Nora's version of it had been published, it needed to be reprinted. There were very few mistakes that she made, I must say.
Well, you're still obviously very active, and that's a good point, perhaps, to end the interview. So,
well, I've just written what certainly has to be my last book, which is a sort of history of research on animal electricity. And I hope that's going to be published by the American Philosophical Society.